to politics. Is Jesus the ultimate party crasher? Let's talk about it with Josh Butler on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. As I always say, you have a seat at our table. We just don't let you talk. In case you were wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter is our executive producer. Matthew, have you thought about running for office?
My doctor says running is not for me, so I'm just avoiding that.
Our producer, Jeremy, is in the glass booth. Jeremy, it's the microphone. Jeremy is a world-class bass player and other instruments, and a big mega guy. That stands for Make America Groove Again.
Oh my gosh, I'm using that.
Print the t-shirts, baby.
Oh man, going on the website today.
There you go.
Yes.
Our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in the tech bunker. John, since you seem to be able to fix everything, maybe you could run for office. And if there is one president we can all support and trust, it's Dr. George Bingham, the president of Key Life. Hail to the chief.
I'll just take it with coffee. Thanks.
And Kathy Wyatt is the soft feminine side of the program. Kathy says we should take it easy on newly elected politicians. It's not easy figuring out which promises to break first.
Boy, Matthew, you were on a roll today.
Man.
Yes.
Listen, sometimes I'm glad I didn't write those, and then other times I wish I had. And
Take the credit.
You've done good.
Oh, thank you.
We got a great guest. It's going to be a good conversation. His name is Joshua Butler, and he has a great book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, The Party Crasher, How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems Our Partisan Divide. That's his latest book. He's written others, Beautiful Union. I don't know if that's political or marriage. and the pursuing God. Aren't you glad that you don't have to pursue him? C.S. Lewis said, to say I was looking for God was like saying a mouse was looking for a cat. Josh, thanks so much for taking your time to be with us. First thing I would say is get a haircut.
No. It's totally awesome.
Well, it's pure, Josh. Just
jealous.
so you know, it's jealousy.
Yeah.
I was born this way, man. I stuck my finger in a light socket as a kid and just never went back. So
I generally, and this has been true most of my life, I'm a conservative, but I'm not an angry one. And as a result, I've had a lot of liberal and progressive and even communist friends. And I've had those over the years, but things have kind of changed. And I did a program with Tony Campolo for a year, a syndicated television program. And Tony's my wacko communist friend, and I'm his wacko right-wing obscurantist friend. But we still remain friends. We still love each other, but something's happened. And I don't know what it is. I've got friends now, and I'm just a sweet, nice, kind, gentle person, but they think I'm ugly. And my mother dresses me funny, and they won't have anything to do with me. And that's not just my story. It's the story of a whole lot of people, not just Christians. I hear it all the time about families who make Thanksgiving the Third World War, can't even get together at Christmas without killing each other. So I expect that I'm going to be fixed. I'm a cynical old preacher, so it's doubtful. I suspect that I'm going to be fixed, Josh, by the end of this program, and I commission you to that particular task. Hey, let's a good place to start. Are you a Democrat or a Republican? No.
That was coming.
Withdraw the question.
Well, I just wanted to know.
Objection.
I wanted to know whether to be angry or not. I wasn't sure.
I plead the fifth.
You just said you weren't angry.
Well, they're all angry at me. And,
Oh, okay.
and the normal result in a human being who's right all the time is to be angry back.
Especially as you get old.
Hey, Josh, tell us about your high school friend, Kyle.
Yes, definitely. Well, first off, Steve, thank you for having me on, man. It's great to be here. And yeah, I am grooving out here in Portland, Oregon. If you really want someone to break the country, elect me for office. That would break things quick. Oh, man. But yeah, so I talked in the intro, my friend high school, Kyle, man, I was sort of the awkward, stuck head in the books kid, and Kyle was a party crasher, man. Like he was the jock high school football star, like everybody loved being around him. And I thought, man, there's no way, we would ever hang out. So I had a party at my house once and he didn't, he didn't even make the invite list because I didn't think he'd want to come. And he showed up at the front door and crashed that party. And one of the things I loved about Kyle as a party crasher was he had this ability to magnetically draw all kinds of people to himself who normally wouldn't hang out together. And so he ended up drawing me into this crowd that it had the goths and the misfits, it had the jocks and the football stars, it had the artists and the readers and everyone you could imagine. And like a magnet, he drew these people to himself that didn't normally hang out together, didn't normally fit together. And not only did he crash everybody's party, but he threw a better party where everyone wanted to be at. We loved heading over to Kyle's house and he would throw these late night parties. We go till 2 a.m. Everyone just loved being together. And I feel like that's a picture of Jesus, like Jesus as the party crasher, that he has this magnetic ability to crash into these parties, not only high school parties, but even our kind of political parties today, where I don't know about you, but I found that the political divide today is wider than ever.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, families and friendships and even churches are fracturing along political fault lines. So I've been a pastor for over 20 years now, and I've noticed the last 2 election seasons in particular, it's only gotten worse, where it's not only about having a different political leaning, but now it's almost like you would say a political bow, where there's almost like an allegiance to certain ideologies that have become not just like I have a different perspective, I have a different experience, but more like I am committed to this ideology or this party platform in a way that is fracturing families and friendships and churches. And that's just been tragic to me. So before I'm a Democrat or Republican, man, I'm a follower of Jesus. And as a pastor, well, man, how do we help prepare ourselves going into this election season to bring our perspectives, to bring our opinions, our things to the table, but to do so in a way of maturity and faithfulness to Jesus, where we can stay united and at the table together, even amidst disagreement.
I knew Jesus was the answer. I just wasn't sure. Hey, by the way, I don't want to crash the party and then ruin it, but they did crucify him. You got to know how. Well, it wasn't the end of the story, but it was close to the end.
Yes.
Is Kyle still around?
Well, they haven't crucified him yet. He's still right. They might crucify me for writing this book. We'll see. But yeah, No, Kyle's still around, and like I mentioned, man, he became a metaphor, an image for me of even what Jesus did in my life. Where Jesus crashed into my party when I was in, kind of high school, college, and had my own sort of little bubble, my own self-enclosed world, and thought I was fine on my own. But as you mentioned, man, I wasn't so much I was looking for God. God was looking for me. I was the mouse, and he was the cat, and he came crashing into my party and actually drew me into a better one. And I found myself now pastoring at churches where we have people who lean in different political directions, but Jesus has given us the ability, the humility to stay at the table together and to learn from each other and to even grow together as disciples together in His kingdom. And I found that to be a much better party
Oh
than
man,
some
I
of the echo
agree.
chambers going on in our culture today.
That's good stuff. Now I'm going to ask you this on the other side of the break because we're running out of time in this particular segment. However, I think that your personality may be different than mine, and I would be interested if you ever get angry. Do you sometimes make an obscene gesture from the pulpit? Do you ever just say, I've had it with you, and you walk? But we'll find out on the other side. But right now, this is hard work, and we do need to take time to rest, have cookies and milk. The book is The Party Crasher, How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems Our Partisan Divide. Hey, we're glad you're here. We consider it a high and holy compliment for you to give time to be with us, and thanks for doing that. We're talking to pastor and author Josh Butler. His latest book is titled "The Party Crasher: How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems Our Partisan Divide." And Josh was telling us about his friend Kyle, who was a party crasher, but everybody loved him. And he said Jesus is kind of like that. He crashes everybody's party and he draws people to himself. And we try to ignore the crucifixion part because it kind of breaks down there at a certain point. But Josh, you're fun to talk to. You really are. I get the feeling that you're kind of like your friend Kyle. We've just known each other for 20 minutes. And I like you a lot. I really do. You're fun.
Oh.
You're bright. You get into the levity. And a lot of our guests are like deer in the headlights. They don't know what to do. But man, you jumped right in. I would be. And I'm not like that. I do have an anger problem, and I'm better. In fact, I'm a lot better because I'm a lot older, and some of it's Jesus, but most of it's just not worth the effort when you're my age. But you seem like a gentle, kind, compassionate guy, and I like you. Do you ever get angry and make an obscene gesture?
Well, man, I like you, Steve. You're hilarious, man. This is so fun getting to chat. Yeah, it's funny because I am a pretty jovial guy. Like I'm maybe like the Joker in Batman. I've got the smile plastered on my face. But people will ask my wife Holly, they're like, "Man, is he always like that? Because he just seems happy." And she's like, "Yep, he's always like this." So, so I think that's kind of my personality. That's kind of my personality. But the reality is, man, I did have some years. So a while back there was some stuff that happened to me. It was really rough, and I was still happy. I'd say some people who mistreated me, some slander, a rough season. And my wife was like, "Why aren't you angry?" And I did actually go through some counseling. I realized, man, I should have been angry, and I was, like holding some stuff down, kind of stuffing some stuff that actually was appropriate to be angry at. And so I've been on a learning process. Jesus has been teaching me that, man, there's times that anger is appropriate,
Oh, it is.
and
And
needing to work through that, man.
I'll teach you how to do that if you'll teach me how to be like you.
Josh,
Let's do it, man. We'll swap classes.
I think we're all growing and learning here. We've had a breakthrough, and that's our time. So in the book, Josh, you talk about how all of our little different political parties the politics have become a religion in like the worst possible sense of the word. And if that holds true, then it makes sense that within that kind of really fraught religion, there's different denominations. Would you talk about those kind of four divisions that you kind of outlined? And as soon as you did, I was reading, I was like, I'm in that one.
Yeah, right.
I felt seen.
Yes.
I felt seen real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, so we tend to think of politics as left and right, which is true. There's this left-right spectrum. But we often don't realize, I think, is there's also a top-down spectrum, what I call kind of the shift from modernity to post-modernity, and how that's split the left and right, where some of the deepest fighting we see today is not so much between left and right, but between different camps on the left and on the right. So for those who are listening, if you can kind of imagine four quadrants, what I call the upper left quadrant, or the modern left, would be what I call the religion of progress, with the creed of we can change the world. And you can think here of like Silicon Valley, and the high priest would be folks like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And there's a sense of we can use science, reason, institutions, technology to change and transform the world and make it a better place. If we go in the upper right quadrant, this was what I call the religion of responsibility, whose creed is pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And so historically, I think the high priest would have been folks like Ronald Reagan and folks like Newt Gingrich and Milton Friedman. But today, I'd say that the baton has been passed to figures like Jordan Peterson, where, hey, if you want to make the world, start by making your bed, take responsibility for yourself. And there's a high emphasis in this quadrant on responsibility, personal ownership, taking care of your family, your neighborhood, your emphasis on small business, entrepreneurship, things of that nature. But now if we move to the lower quadrants, and this is where postmodernity has generated kind of a suspicion of things that the upper quadrants held in common. In the lower left, I call this the religion of identity, whose creed is live your truth. And so here, there's a sense of, man, we still want progress and change, but we no longer trust institutions, reason, authority, those kind of things. So now we look within and go find who you are inside. We can think here of like the urban core and figures like Ta-Nehisi Coates or Elliot Page. And there's the worship leader in this would be maybe like Lady Gaga or Little Nas X, who are continually changing their personality, like performative self-expression. And so here, the religion of identity. And if we move over to the lower right quadrant, this would be what I call the religion of security, whose creed is good fences make good neighbors. And so there's a sense here of you still want to take responsibility, but it's more of a loyalty to those who are closest to you. And we no longer trust institutions or authority and things in this quadrant. And so there's a sense of, the deep state wants to take away your rights. Big pharma is pushing its meds and its pills and its vaccines on you. The fake media is trying to push its narratives on you. So there's a deep suspicion. And when I talk about these four quadrants, I'm not trying to place judgment on them per se at this point. Like, I'm really just trying to describe what feels like the lay of the land. And these are broad brushstrokes. There's nuance and complexity. But big picture, I found that many of us have different leanings or pulls into one of those four quadrants, and that there are ways that those four things are good. God gave us responsibility, progress, identity, security. They can be good things, but when we make them ultimate things, as many of those quadrants do, they can become like an idol that can pull our allegiance away from Jesus, and that can pull us in some directions that can become unhealthy.
Oh, man, that's profound. It really is. I'm all for at one time. I mean,
Is that the problem?
And not only that, I carry a gun. And I can get others to follow me into the abyss of that sort of thing. All of that, and we've got to talk about it on the other side of the break, but all of that is centered around me, isn't it? It's centered around my views. It's centered around what I can do. It's centered around self-righteousness. And that kills us all. Maybe you've hit a key. Maybe you've found something, and we're going to find out on the other side of the break. Maybe you found something that we all need to hear, to be convicted, and then to repent. And then we can change the world. No, that's a joke. We got to go. The name of the book is The Party Crasher: How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems Our Partisan Divide. Don't go anywhere. Just like Jesus, we're going to return. Hey, we're hanging out with pastor and author Josh Butler. You can keep up with him at Joshua Ryan, R-Y-A-N, Butler.com, and on Facebook and Instagram at Joshua Butler PHX.
Josh, before the break, you were describing the model that you present in the book, the kind of the quadrants of left and right and modern, postmodern, and seemed to capture those different perspectives so well. Did you see that? Have you seen stories of those situations, and how did that work out? Were there ways that they came together, caused more division? Tell us some about that.
Definitely. It's while I've seen one of the things that has been interesting has been how many people increasingly I found are like whatever quadrant they're in, that can become like a filter that can even distort what they hear or the way that they're interacting with others. So one example, we had a visitor at our church who came up to us and was like, "Hey, why do you guys have these All Lives Matter posters all over your building?" And we were like, "What All Lives Matter posters?" He's like, "You guys have these All Lives Matter posters plastered all over your property." And I was thinking, man, did we get graffitied or tagged or something? Because I don't think we had any. So like, can you show us these posters? So he walks over our campus, and our vision statement for over 10 years has been, and it's true, this is all over the campus. The vision statement is, all of life is all for Jesus. All of life is all for Jesus. And so
How
he
dare
was
you,
seeing
sir.
these posters and going like, all lives matter, And it's like, oh, and I just want to be like, stop reading into stuff. Like, that's not what we're saying. And then, and so he was in like the religion of identity as we got to talk with him more and understand. And he was reading everything through that grid. And so, but then we also had someone in the religion of security around that same time, the lower right quadrant, who one of our pastors was giving a message, preaching a sermon on progressive sanctification. And so he mentioned like 3 times in the sermon, progressive sanctification, which is this historic Christian idea that we don't become holy overnight. We're not sanctified overnight. It's a gradual process of progressively being sanctified. But she came up afterwards so angry and just lit into him saying, "Why are you saying that if I'm becoming sanctified, I'm going to become more progressive?"
Oh no!
And as if that wasn't enough, the next day he had 2 emails from other people in the church who were same thing. They were angry about that. And those are kind of humorous stories, but I've really seen that even on a more serious level. I had one church in our network that we were really close friends with. They had their church split, like 1,500 out of 3,000 people left angry over the political divide. And to my perspective, it was over nothing. The lead pastor had put out a video on Instagram, kind of a short 5-minute video, and it seemed pretty tame. He wasn't trying to make a point. It was pretty mild, but it was one of those things where some people in one of those quadrants like began reading it through this grid, They begin having coffee shop conversations with people. Here's why the church is going south. They begin scouring every church in the network, 10 churches. They begin scouring every pastor's sermons, looking for ammo, scouring our pastors and their spouses' social media feeds, looking for anything to take down the church. They got another church in town to launch a sermon series against that church in our network. And it worked, even though so much of it was slander and gossip and not rooted in anything real. Those political fracture lines, there were people looking for a reason to take someone down, and it split the church. And I wish I could say that was just a one-off story, but I've talked to friends around the country, pastors leading churches around the country, and finding that this is tragically, in some ways, I think the new church split, where churches today are fracturing not so much along doctrinal fault lines as rather cultural and political ones. And I believe we need to fight for the unity for which Christ died. We don't want to trample on the unity for which Christ died. And that's where I'm hoping this book can be a resource to help us.
My reaction to your story about the church that's divided is it's from the Network movie. I'm mad as hell.
I'm gonna take it.
And I'm not going to take it anymore. And I carry a gun, which doesn't fix anything, I don't think, does it? Well, there should be some anger at people that go around looking at churches and how to destroy them. I mean, I think even that's on a moral equivalent to Jesus and the money changers, and a case could be made for anger at that point, couldn't there?
Yes.
You're not buying this, are you?
Yeah, no, I believe so. I don't get angry easily, but this is something that makes me angry and upset. Is I believe Jesus died. He gave his life for the unity of the church, and he calls people to himself from all different. We see in the Gospels he calls fishermen and tax collectors. And back in the day, tax collectors and zealots, and they politically hated each other. The zealots wanted to overthrow the empire. The tax collectors were collaborators with the empire, and the thought that Jesus has these two guys sitting around the campfire at the end of every day, doing ministry together, having these conversations. I imagine those were probably some heated conversations. And yet Jesus called people from all different walks of life, blue collar fishermen, white collar doctors like Luke, into his party. And Jesus is bringing us together.
And he's still doing that. By the way, just so you know, the tax collectors are the Democrats. I just the name of the book. And listen, we're going to get down to how do you make this work. The book is, you got to read this, and you need to have small groups in your church that study it. This is so profound and so good, I can hardly stand it. It's called The Party Crasher: How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems our partisan divide, by Joshua Butler. And he is our guest. Thanks for spending this hour with us. If you're enjoying the show and our other show, Key Life, you'll probably like our newest podcast. It's called Simply Sermons. You can find it on the Key Life app on your favorite podcast platform or at keylife.org/Simply Sermons.
And those pretty much feature you, don't they?
Yeah, but I'm going to die soon, and we'll have some others.
What a pleasant thought. Anyway, Josh, during the break, you made a comment about the fists and knives coming out, etc. I'm old enough that I remember back years and years and years ago. I mean, there's always been people that wanted to come out with fists and knives and fight. I mean, that's not something that's new in our generation, but I dare say that it is not. Was certainly not anywhere near to the extent that it is these days. And I'm wondering what your feeling is about social media and how that exacerbates the situation. I mean, you can, as we all know, you can sit down and type any miserable, rotten thing you want to say about anybody, anything, any political party, and it seems to be, pretty much okay. And the vitriol that happens between people who participate in it, it's like, I would not want to be in a room with these people because Lord knows what could happen, but because they're displaced from actually being physically next to each other, they say that and they do that, and everybody feels like their opinion is every bit as valid as everybody else's. Is this just? I don't see how we can get even in the church on the other side of this. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, a few observations from my perspective. One would be that I think social media today tends to amplify the most extreme voices. So, there's been studies that show it tends to be the most extreme, like 10% on the left, 10% on the right, that are really amplified by social media. And so, I think you have a silent majority who are more I don't know, kind or, like that are actually really frustrated with the polarization and the extremes and all. But if you're just online, it seems like the country and everyone around you is way more extreme than they actually are. So that would be one factor. A second factor that comes to mind is, like you mentioned, when you're face to face and there's social cues, you have to see how your words impact someone. You communicate differently. But when you're typing on a keyboard, you don't have to see how it's impacting. I think it can depersonalize the person on the other end of it, can kind of dehumanize them in the way that you interact with them and treat them. So people are way ruder on email or on social media or in different contexts than they would tend to be in person. But a third one, and this is one that I talk more significantly about in the book, but is how the algorithms and everything tend to push us into more extreme echo chambers where everything that we're hearing on social media is just reinforcing our own kind of confirmation biases, confirming the biases that we already have. So there's an author, Bill Bishop, who wrote an influential book called The Big Sort a while back about how Americans are sorting themselves into different places where you tend to, both geographically and online, you tend to end up surrounded by people who see the world the same way we do. And his observation in the study is how, he kind of tags it as mixed company moderates and homogeneous company pushes you towards the extremes. And what he's saying there is when you're around people and interacting with folks who see the world differently than you do, it tends to moderate it. It gives you a little more nuance, a little more perspective, gives you a little more compassion or understanding, or you can kind of understand where either other people are coming from, even if you really disagree, even strongly disagree with them. But when you're only surrounded by people who see the same world the same way you do, it can push you to the extremes. And I think that we're seeing that today. People are more extreme, and the other side becomes more the devil, the enemy. We got to take them down. We got to bring out the fists and knives because they're going to destroy us.
That's good stuff, Josh. By the way, this book has, if you have a small group that studies it, there's some incredible questions at the end of each chapter that can be a part of that discussion. Josh, we don't have much more time, but give us some practical stuff. What can I do? I agree with you. I think this is profound. What do I do next?
That's great. Well, my heart in the book is to get practical. So there's a bunch of practical resources, but one that I mentioned, chapters 4 and 5, I talk about the 10 political commandments, right? In a last election season, we asked our church to sign on to these 10 commandments, and we jokingly called them the 10 political commandments. We don't want people to confuse them with the actual 10 commandments God gave through Moses on Mount Sinai. But these are things that God commands us as his people in Scripture. So if you're a follower of Jesus, these are not negotiable. They're things that God says, hey, this is how I want my people to live. And to give a taste of a few of them, one of them was worship. When I commit my allegiance to King Jesus over all idols and ideologies. Second one was love of neighbor. I commit to participating in civic life as a means of loving and serving my neighbor rather than just serving my own interests. And then there were others, 10 of them, one on image of God, one on biblical wisdom, one on fruitful speech, one on biblical justice, one on peacemaking, removing the log, humble learning, loving enemies. And if folks are interested, you can actually find a free download resource on my website of these 10 political commandments. We call it a Christian political commitment. And these are things you could use in your church or a small group or a ministry resource just to give some clarity and guidelines going, okay, how do we approach this next election season? Here are things that God calls us to. And this is not what opinions to hold, but it's rather how to hold them well. I'm not telling people how to vote per se, but I'm going, here's the posture and the character that Christ calls us to in the midst of this season. And yeah, that's one thing. And then in addition to that, I'd say there's a lot of practical resources in the book on things that we've tried. Talk about prayer and action groups that we started that were a year of people committing to, all right, hey, I'm going to vote nationally, but how can I work locally on issues that I really care about in ways that we would pray together and learn together and seek to take concrete action in ways that could make our city or our neighborhood a better place. And often Jesus emphasizes the yeast in the dough, the seed that'll grow into a tree, and going, there's so much emphasis today on the national, but I actually think there's really powerful stuff we can do in our communities and our churches locally that can make a much bigger impact. We really kind of put our hand to the plow and work in our community in ways that represent Jesus constructively and well. So there's a bunch of examples of ways to do that.
Hey, Josh, give us your website again, and that's great.
Yeah, it's joshuaryanbutler.com, joshuaryanbutler.com. I'd also say, you mentioned there's discussion questions, reflection questions at the end of every chapter for a small group. And I've got some free ministry resources up on my website as well. If folks are interested in, you might be a pastor like me looking at doing a sermon series, I've got some sample sermon outlines I've used or things like that could be resources if folks are looking for them.
Josh, you did us all a favor. This is such good stuff. And thank you for spending an hour with us. You get 3 free sins, and I have it on good authority that you're way behind. So use them carefully. The book, by the way, and you got to get it. We all need to read it and study it and get together. It's called The Party Crasher: How Jesus Disrupts Politics as Usual and Redeems Our Partisan Divide. Joshua Ryan Butler. Joshua Ryan Butler, thanks for spending an hour with us.
Thank you, Steve. It was a joy.
Hey, guys.
Thanks for you all.
We're going to come back. Don't go away. We just were discussing around the table and in the control room about how good this hour was and how great the book is. Man, if there was ever a time for this kind of teaching, this is the time. I've told you, and you know this, that I'm very political and I have very strong political views. And I, as I listen to Josh talk, I've decided I'm going to put this into practice. I'm going to go out and find a commie, and instead of pointing a gun at him, I'm going to tell him that Jesus loves him, and that I'm doing my best. There is so much. This is so practical, and so real, and so needed, and it's so the essence of what it means to be a Christian. And sometimes in the heat of the battle, because I really do think people are doing some really bad stuff, but in the heat of the battle, we forget the essence of what this is about and who we are. I'll tell you, politics is important, but it's not nearly as important as Jesus. Politics is important, but it's not nearly as important as you are. Politics is important, but it's not nearly as important as the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. And somebody like Josh reminds us. Now, he has a wonderful personality. I mean, we all just immediately were drawn to him and we liked him. Not everybody has that kind of personality. But we all have the same Savior who is molding us to be like himself. And a part of that has to do with exactly what we've been talking about during this last hour. So if you feel guilty, good. I do too. And we'll be guilty together and repent and then vote. Kathy, who's going to be on next week?
Next week, we're going to have with us Marvin Olasky, who
I
I
thought he died.
Well, evidently not
he
until he
thought
got
you
done with
died.
the book.
Until after next week.
But anyway, he was the editor-in-chief of World Magazine
Yeah, I know.
for almost 30 years. And anyway, his new book is titled Pivot Points, Adventures on the Road to Christian Contentment. It's a memoir.
It's going to be good.
Yep.
He wrote the best book ever written on Christian compassion and social justice. Well, listen, we're out of here. Put a fork in us. We're done. But we're going to come back next week, same time, same place. And it's our fond hope that you join us. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.